This morning, Afghanistan and the August 31st deadline. We are 48 hours away right now. Congressman Jake Ellzey is with us from Washington, D.C., explaining why that date likely led to the deadly chaos. The state legislature finally passing changes to Texas voting laws. So what might Democrats do next? State Rep Jean Wu, a Houston Democrat, joins us from the Capitol. In Dallas, a city IT worker mistakenly deleted 22 terabytes of data on a hard drive. But council became furious because they had to learn about it on the news. We'll talk to Councilman Casey Thomas. And what's going on at UT Austin? The university is starting a publicly funded think tank with conservatives. But getting information on it is hard to do.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning to our viewers across the state. Before we get to our guests, let's first catch you up on the top political headlines here in Texas. We are watching legislation in Austin this weekend that would finally give money to school districts for virtual learning. This is Senate Bill 15 and would pay for virtual learning for 2 more years. But the way it is written right now, no more than 10% of a single school district can be virtual at any one time. So far, a number of smaller school districts canceled classes entirely because they're seeing a rise in COVID cases among students. The Texas House will soon vote on whether to spend almost $2 billion on the southern border. The extra money would pay for prosecuting migrants and sending additional state troopers to the region. But the Texas Tribune reports that immigrant advocates call this a waste of money because it would divert law enforcement away from more serious crimes to address a humanitarian issue. And a former star player with the Dallas Cowboys is now running for the U.S. Senate in Georgia. You'll likely recognize Herschel Walker there. He's 59, a Republican from Georgia, and now among the candidates trying to unseat Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock next year. Herschel Walker, of course, a Heisman Trophy winner who played for the Dallas Cowboys in the late 1980s and 1990s. Let's begin this morning, though, with the deteriorating situation in Afghanistan. We are now 48 hours away from the deadline set by President Biden to have all U.S. troops leave that country. But our first guest says setting that deadline, that was part of the problem. Congressman Jake Ellzey is a retired U.S. Navy commander who served in Iraq and Afghanistan and was elected this summer to represent the state's 6th congressional district, parts of Arlington and Ellis and Navarro counties in North Texas. Congressman Ellzey, thank you for the time. Congratulations on your election. We haven't spoken to you since you got to Congress, but let's talk about what has become very clear in the past couple of weeks. No one really seems to know how we should have gotten out of Afghanistan in these final few hours that we're in here. How would you have led this withdrawal any differently?
First of all, you have to understand that the Taliban are not a trustworthy group. They are not the government in charge. We should never recognize them, nor should we ever trust them. Unfortunately, that is borne out in what you have seen now, and I think we're up to 3 explosions at the airport in Kabul. So there are a number of different things tactically that I or anybody else in charge, frankly, would have done differently. So I would say that using an airport like Hamid Karzai International in the middle of, or at the north part of Kabul, yet surrounded by neighborhoods from a force protection and evacuation standpoint wasn't the choice that I would have used. We should have maintained Bagram 30 miles to the north, which has 2 runways. I flew out of there as a contractor in 2013 and 2014. It's much more easily defended, and it has heavy lift capability, long runways, and an ability to launch and land aircraft simultaneously.
You mentioned the Taliban a moment ago, too. I want to ask you about that because the last administration, the Trump administration, actually cut the deal on withdrawal with the Taliban, not with the Afghan government. And people now are saying, well, if they cut it with the Afghan government, it might have lended some credibility to that kind of fledgling government there. Was it a mistake to deal with the Taliban to start with that led to this entire withdrawal?
That's a good question. And I took office 3 weeks ago, and I wasn't in on any of the particulars, any of the negotiations, who they negotiated with, the government or the Taliban. So I really can't answer that.
Congressman, over the last 20 years, when we zoom out and look at this, was the U.S. war in Afghanistan ever winnable?
It depends on what your strategic aims are, Jason. that is another one for the history books and the political scientists to figure out. I went there. I was there on the USS Enterprise when the second plane hit, and then I deployed in 2009 and 10 as a squadron commanding officer, flying Super Hornets, supporting troops on the ground, and we saved thousands of lives. We educated young women in a place that had never had that before because of the Taliban. What's happened in this case is we have a president who thought it was a good idea at some point to signify our pullout by using the date of September 11th, 20 years after the fact. Nobody in their right mind would use that date except for him. And he got abruptly corrected. And so then he moved it up to August 31st. If you've ever been in uniform and ever been on a mission accomplishment date is an arbitrary thing that is not met with reality in combat. So your mission is complete only when the mission is complete and not a minute before.
At the end of the day, it sounds like one of the biggest mistakes you think the Biden administration made is by setting a specific date for withdrawal as opposed to just slowly pulling everyone out. Is that right?
Without question. And our Democrat colleagues agree. That's if you've heard some of the things that I've heard from our Democrat colleagues, they sound just like us because we're all Americans, and this is an embarrassment. And this has a long-term, lasting negative effects to our allies, to our adversaries. And yes, an August 31st date that was arbitrary, set by the president himself. And many in his administration are quick to say, we didn't tell him that. And yes, we knew this was going to happen if he did this. So this is, the president has said, I'm in charge and the buck stops here, followed quickly by blaming other people.
Congressman Ellzey, we appreciate the time. Congratulations again on your election.
Thank you very much, Jason.
Let's go to Austin now, and a government watchdog story that the Texas Tribune has really been digging on. UT Austin has quietly been working with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and other conservatives to create a limited government think tank there at the university. It would teach individual liberty, private enterprise, and free markets, among other things. Stanford University has something similar in California, but Stanford is a private school. UT is public. Ross Ramsey's team is trying to get to the bottom of this. He's the co-founder and executive editor of the Texas Tribune. Ross, good morning to you.
Good morning, Jason. How are you?
Doing well here. This is a fascinating story, but why are all involved being so secretive about this?
Well, they kind of snuck it into the budget. There's a thing called a rider, which is a one-line sentence that says use X amount of money for X. And they slipped this into the UT part of the budget. It's $6 million initially. And they have been privately fundraising. Apparently, Dan Patrick has been working with Kevin Eltife, who's the chancellor at UT, with the UT president, and with some others, some other big donors at UT to try to get this thing in place before anybody knew about it. And now that everybody knows about it, they can start expanding it.
Fascinating. Make sure your team stays on top of that one. I do want to shift off and ask you about the Supreme Court ordering Biden to reinstate Trump's Remain in Mexico program for migrants. And it sounds like that Biden and his administration might not have followed the correct legal process.
Right. So they might have to backtrack on this. This is the program that says if someone is trying to get into the country on asylum, where do they sit while they're waiting? And this is Remain in Mexico while you're waiting. So we would send them back over. The Mexican government has to be hand in hand with the U.S. government on that. Right now, they're not. It's kind of a mess.
Indeed so. Ross, back to you in a moment. Thank you very much. Coming up, it took 3 attempts, but Texas Republicans finally changing Texas voting laws. What might Democrats do next? A bold prediction this morning from State Rep Gene Wu, a Houston Democrat, in just a moment. And a furious city council in Dallas after staff left elected leaders in the dark when an IT employee deleted 22 terabytes of city data. We'll talk to Councilman Casey Thomas in just a moment. And a reminder about our political podcast. Brand new conversations drop every Tuesday. You can search for Y'all-itics wherever you get your podcasts. The Texas Legislature is finally passing changes to state voting laws. No more options for 24-hour voting centers, no drive-through voting, but there is more access now for partisan poll watchers, among other things. So what might Democrats do next? Do they have any options? State Rep Gene Wu making a bold prediction this morning. He is our next guest, a Democrat who represents the southwest side of Houston. Representative Wu, welcome back to the program. Thanks for being here. I want to ask you about the vote that happened on Thursday night after that 12 hours of debate. Democrats broke quorum twice in order to avoid that. Can you kind of characterize how you and your colleagues are feeling now that this has passed?
So, look, I mean, from the very beginning, we knew that we couldn't kill this thing forever. It was just Republicans control every single aspect of the state. I mean, they sent troopers after us. They had arrest warrants out for us. Governor was threatening to put us in jail. We held out for as long as we could. And, in the meantime, we accomplished a lot. I mean, we restarted the national discussion on voting rights. I'm sure we can take credit for it, but I feel like we had a part in changing President Biden's speech in Pennsylvania. We pushed Congress to push the John Lewis Act that they just pushed out of the House, that they voted out of the House just this week, just a few days ago. We came back to the floor to deal with this mess.
Last fall, Texas Democrats were able to mobilize a large turnout despite the coronavirus. But after Republicans are now going to roll back many of those changes that happened there in Houston, Harris County, where you are, how are Democrats going to be able to mobilize a turnout again for the midterms next year in light of this legislation?
Yeah, so I don't think that mobilization was necessarily because of the pandemic. And I think that's the Republicans feel like it was. Democrats were mobilized because Democrats were tired of Republicans. We're tired of Republicans in Congress. We're tired of Republicans in the White House. They're tired of Republicans in the State House. And all the different policies that led up to 600,000 people being dead from a virus that could have been controlled. And just so many other things. And I've said this time and time again, mark my words, this election bill will bite Republicans in the ass. I guarantee it, because Republicans on average are like 10 years older than Democrats on average. Republicans use mail-in ballots far more than Democrats. Republicans overwhelmingly use early voting. Guess what this bill affects? It affects mail-in ballots. It affects early voting. It affects older voters. And you know what? They put in all these provisions for people to challenge mail-in ballots, to challenge people's votes. Guess what? Democrats can do that too. And all these Republican areas that have never seen somebody come out and challenge, maybe it's time Democrats put groups together to go challenge ballots up there.
Let's talk about the next election for a moment. Here we are closing in on Labor Day, Representative Wu, and we have not even a hint of a potential candidate for governor on the Democratic side. Who would you like to see run?
Somebody credible. Somebody who can raise money, somebody who can organize, somebody who has...
Who is that?
I don't know yet. And you can press me all you want. I don't know. I have in my mind who I want, but that's for me.
Representative Wu, we could talk for quite a while. Always appreciate the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
In Dallas, an unbelievable error at City Hall. An IT worker mistakenly deleted 22 terabytes of city data on a hard drive, but the council became furious because they had to learn about it on the news rather than from city staff. Dallas City Councilman Casey Thomas demanded answers recently. He represents part of Southern Dallas. Councilman Thomas, it's good to see you again on our program here. Let's start with the recent data loss that the city of Dallas experienced. At a recent hearing we watched, you expressed a lot of frustration with the city manager's office and city staff. Who do you hold responsible?
Well, Jason, thank you for having me once again. At the end of the day, we all know the city manager runs the city. And as he said, and he took ownership for this, and he said his team, he looks back on it in hindsight and says, well, I probably should have informed the council sooner. But as far as the data breach itself, we have to lay blame where blame, is. It's with the IT employee who, caused the breach. He didn't follow proper procedures and protocol and went up in that type of situation.
Councilman, there's 8 terabytes of data that my understanding is just have not been recovered, and it's doubtful that data can be recovered. Exactly what kind of data is this that remains missing, and how many criminal cases might be thrown out because of the missing data?
Yeah, well, Chief of Police, he was a part of that committee meeting, he said that they're still in the process of identifying what that data is, seeing what's recoverable and what may have been archived data that was lost, but they have actual permanent files. Last information we received was, as of now, there were no pending cases, definitely murder cases or anything of that nature, where they did not have the evidence to be able to provide to the DA's office to move forward.
Councilman, the city of Dallas got $355 million in federal funds because of COVID. Your district is south of Interstate 30. I'm just curious, where do you, or how much of that money do you expect will be spent in your district or in neighborhoods that are south of I-30, and on what?
Right. Well, we got half of it. We'll get the other half a year from now. And we're in the process at this point, even during our budget town hall meetings, of getting an update of what the amount is, what the city CFO is recommending, but it's still at the discretion of the council. We want to make sure that many of these dollars are used to address long-time challenges and issues as relates to the city of Southern Dallas in particular. Areas that have been neglected for a long time. We talk about infrastructure, we talk about streets, we talk about sidewalks, we talk about things that make a neighborhood, provide a quality of life for a neighborhood. We want to make sure at a minimum we can provide that.
We'll be watching to see how the money is spent. Councilman Thomas, we appreciate your time. Good to see you as always.
Hey, thank you, Jason. It's always a pleasure.
COVID is on the verge of breaking records in Texas, just as Governor Abbott broadens his ban on vaccine mandates. Will this pay off politically for him or motivate opposition? One of our questions next on the Roundtable.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Ross Ramsey is back from the Texas Tribune in Austin. Bud Kennedy is here from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and Bernadine Steptoe, a political producer at WFAA in Dallas. And Ross, let's start with you. COVID obviously surging here in Texas once again. Governor Abbott is doubling down on his vaccine mandates. Is this going to pay off politically for him, or might it just motivate opposition?
You know, he's been dancing with this for a year and a half now. Do you protect against COVID or do you protect commerce? Going back and forth between those. He's decided to let people go free. He says they know all the things they're supposed to do. I'm not going to make them do those things. And he's doubling down on that.
Bud, what do you expect to see?
Well, you know, he's still emphasizing personal liberty over public health. I expect to see a lot of doctors and nurses throw up their hands and walk out if there isn't more work on public health. But I think that Governor Abbott is still trying to toe the line. And most of all, he sees the future and sees that this particular spike is going to quiet down with more vaccinations.
And of course, this obviously plays well with the Republican base, who he is really trying to court again, Bernadine, for the midterm election next March or whenever that might be.
And we're going to continue to see him play to his base, regardless of the appearance that he looks as if he's anti-children. He's fighting the schools, those particular schools that want to manage their own COVID response, and the narrative that he doesn't like children. You're hearing that from his opponents, but he's going to continue because for the last few months, his focus has been on re-election. Well, for almost 2 years.
Yeah, and it seems like Democrats really have a command of messaging over the past couple of months with this. So that'll be interesting to watch and see how that plays out. But let me ask you about this nightmare we're all watching in Afghanistan, the deadly withdrawal going on there. Texas Democrats obviously pretty quiet about this. We haven't heard a lot of Democrats saying much about it besides the attack that happened on Thursday. Congressman Mark Vesey, though, I spoke to him. He was one of the few that said we need to stay there as long as it takes to get everyone out who wants to get out. Why are Texas Democrats being so quiet? It's just not politically savvy to be talking about, I guess.
You know, and Congressman Vesey comes from the defense school, from the Chet Edwards School of that America should stand for something strong. He also said that Joe Biden should answer the tough questions. And I saw that Joaquin Castro, too, also said that he had a lot of problems with the evacuation. But a lot of the rest of the Democrats seem like they're just so busy haggling in the legislature, they don't want to talk about this terrorist attack.
Well, why aren't Democrats addressing this, Bernadine, in your idea?
Well, they are addressing it. Keep in mind, silence is an answer. but they're supporting the president. And then why should they pound and jump on the bandwagon with Republicans? The Republicans are doing enough of criticizing, but they're going to stick with Biden. He's their president. Now, you do have some who are questioning the evacuation, but that's about the extent of it. They're going to stick with the president.
Yeah, and indeed, at the end of the day, silence is an answer, and we saw that so often. We're watching it now, but we saw it so often when President Trump was in office as well, too. At the end of the day, Ross, what's your take on this? Is this going to be something that people remember and something that hurts Democrats come next year?
I don't know. The election is a long way off. People have a way of, forgetting these things. Nobody's talking about electric shutdowns now. We went into the last election and we thought people were going to be talking about George Floyd, and a lot of them were not. It's hard to tell what's got a lasting effect.
And that's a good point. Bud, last word on this, because people aren't talking about what happened in January with the lights that went out. Is this something that lasts, do you think?
I think this is different. I think this becomes an issue for Biden, just like it was an issue for Jimmy Carter. Something Democrats will have to prove they stand for a strong defense.
Good deal. Guys, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thank you for watching as well. We're back again next Sunday to take you inside Texas politics. Hope to see you then. Hope you have a great week as well.